Before we begin and I introduce our speaker, Robert Amsterdam, I just want to say how gratified we are at the attendance. And I thought that people might be depressed at Nigeria and Venezuela, but my take on this is that the $130 oil prices have trumped any fears that people might have about Venezuela and Nigeria. I'm not sure. But when we wrote the program announcement maybe a month and a half ago for today's program, oil was at $100 a barrel. And I remember the announcement had said that with such substantial oil prices, even dealing in difficult parts of the world like Nigeria and Venezuela, there's more interest in taking those risks. Now with $120 a barrel, of course it's even more so, $130, I guess it is almost. Correct me, I see many energy people, but is it 126? Okay, that's substantial. Robert Amsterdam is here today to discuss the many characteristics and political trends shared by Venezuela and Nigeria, these in two important markets, and what we all need to know if you're doing business there. Amsterdam is an international attorney and founding partner at Amsterdam Peroff in Canada. His commentary has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Financial Times, The Guardian, among others, and he's been prominently featured in a BBC documentary. I've known him as one of the attorneys working for on the Khodorkovsky trial about Yukos, and so he's certainly found a way to work in some interesting parts of the world. Please join me in welcoming Robert Amsterdam.
Well, people always ask me, talking about Khodorkovsky, how difficult and how scary was it being in Russia and being arrested as I was at 2 o'clock in the morning? And I tell people, well, it was nothing, because I was in Nigeria just at the end of the Biafran War. So I said, believe me, if you can live through what Nigeria was like at that time, even Russia today seems somewhat manageable. But I am going to admit a bias to all of you. My relationship with Nigeria has been one that has brought me a tremendous feeling of love and appreciation for its people, a people that have survived through immense hardship, through absolutely drastic military rule, and have come out the other end in an attempt to develop some form of democratic hope for their future. Unfortunately, they, as well as Venezuela, as well as Russia to some extent, have been subject to what has become known as the resource curse. And that resource curse basically means that when a country derives the vast majority of its income from petroleum or commodities, this dynamic means, I'm sorry, we're getting feedback here. This dynamic means that the central state, the federal power, the executive power, becomes all-encompassing. It destroys institutions, and because the state becomes dependent on the economic rents of the commodity, it becomes disengaged from its people. This has happened tragically in Nigeria. Nigeria, unfortunately, is a country that has been set apart because of the tremendous disputes among the various ethnic groups and the need to balance between the Muslims in the north, the Yoruba in the south, the Igbo and other tribes in the east, and particularly those tribes which are indigenous to the Delta, where the vast amount of oil and reserves are based. This tension in Nigeria, as many of you know, has led to a massive percentage of shut-ins in terms of the petroleum, the internal petroleum. I'm not talking about offshore, the petroleum that's based in the Delta, where there's been a tremendous amount of insurgency and insurrection. There has, however, been an election in 2007 It was, however, an election which involved essentially a fraudulent vote, particularly in the Delta, where many of the states in the Delta were basically handed over to the federal party under the new president, even though representatives of that party could not show themselves in those states in the Delta. So there's been a tremendous democracy deficit, and unfortunately, the new president, who is, by the way, featured in an interview in today's Financial Times, the new president has not yet found his footing. He hasn't found his footing in terms of addressing the issues in the Delta, and he hasn't fully found his footing in terms of the plan for Nigeria to face this resource curse, move past the destruction of its institutions, reintegrate an actual very strong judiciary, reintegrate it to bring back rule of law, and attempt to move past what is considered in the world one of the most corrupt nations on earth today. And to understand that corruption, all one needs to do is take a look at the level of impoverishment in the Delta. Take a look at the fact that those areas which produced this vast wealth have been left without the basics of sanitation, the basics of health and welfare. Those oil companies, those IOCs that presently can invest in Nigeria in favorable conditions, relatively favorable conditions, have been left into a structure that essentially isolates them from the local communities, that continues to lead to a bunker type of mentality, and that has led to a tremendous amount of hostility at a local level, which the federal government has been unable to deal with because the centralization of power in Nigeria has left the states without their fair share of the pie, and the corruption at the state level has been massive as well. And this corruption and this lack of legitimacy at the state level has meant that the individual, the citizen's interaction with the federal government through its representatives is continuously unsatisfactory, with massive unemployment, and with an infrastructure, if you speak to friends in Lagos, as I did this morning, which shuttles between constant electricity shutoffs, inability to get to work, deteriorating infrastructure, and essentially a level of violence on the streets that is almost unparalleled. At the same time, from an American perspective, Nigeria is a key ally. Nigeria is a key source of energy. Nigeria is a country that was behind some of the developments in the U.S. military that led to the establishment of AFRICOM, although when AFRICOM first was announced, they had to continue to leave it in Germany because outside of one country you couldn't find another host in Africa that wanted to have it. And because, and this is going to be an issue I'm going to touch on when we talk about Venezuela, the United States continues to identify its strategic interests in security with the strategic interests of the companies with which it wants to partner, the companies and the countries with which it wants to partner. Security in Nigeria today doesn't just involve issues of the Muslim North and the Christian South. It involves the ability to secure